March 1943 North Atlantic. Somewhere between Greenland and Ireland, the sea is black glass. No moon. Norison. Only the slow pulse of phosphorescent foam as a German-type SEC U-boat, U-502, rises from the depths, her diesel engines cough awake. Shuddering through the pressure hull, the men are ghosts in oilskin coats, faces pale from weeks below, salt biting at their lips. Oberleutnant Kurt Hagen, 29 years old, watches the surface through his binoculars. Luft ist klar. He mutters, air is clear. The order is routine, but tonight it feels almost superstitious. They need to breathe. Batteries are nearly empty. Oxygen is foul. The diesels roar, and the electric motors fall silent. U-502 begins to recharge the most dangerous few hours in a submarine's life. Above them, there is nothing, or so they think. Hundreds of miles away, on a windswept runway at RAF Chivener in Devon, an engine note rises through the night. A Vickers Wellington Mk.III. Call sign R for Roger. Lurches forward. Its twin Bristol Pegasus engines hammering the dark. Twin Pegasus engines hammering the dark. Inside, Flight Lieutenant Arthur Hodgson and his crew of 5 settle into the familiar rhythm of another endless patrol. The aircraft smells of oil, damp canvas, and nervous sweat. Course 275. Hodgson says over the intercom. The navigator marks the heading on a grease pencil. The wireless operator checks the frequencies. In the bomb bay below, an unfamiliar shape glints under a tarpaulin, a new experimental device. The night sea has become the war's deadliest frontier. Since 1939, German U-boats have hunted convoys like wolves, cutting the supply artery that keeps Britain alive. The mid-Atlantic gap, the Black Pit, lies beyond the reach of land-based radar and escort cover. Here, merchant ships burn alone under the stars. For months, Admiral Karl Dönitz's submarine fleet had ruled it unchallenged. March 1943, in fact, will be their most triumphant month. Over 82 Allied ships sunk, but the tide is about to turn quietly, invisibly, from the air, inside the Wellington's nose. A new radar set hums to life, ASV Mk.III. The first microwave airborne surface vessel radar capable of pinpointing a periscope at 5 miles. Even in total darkness, the glowing green screen flickers, painting phantom arcs across its glass. Beside it, the radar operator, Sergeant Bill Tuckett, adjusts a dial with nervous precision. Contact. Skipper. Bearing 312, range 3 miles. Strong echo. Hodgson leans forward. 3 miles. That's a surfaced sub if I've ever seen one. The crew moves in practice silence. The Wellington banks into a slow turn, engines straining against the wind. Somewhere below, a dark shape crawls across the radar, sweep unaware of the predator. Above, until this month, radar had been both miracle and curse. Earlier versions of ASV sets gave away their presence. The U-boats carried receivers, called METOCs, which could detect the incoming radar pulses and dive before the aircraft even arrived. British crews had watched helplessly as blips vanished into the deep, but the Mk.III's new centimetric wavelength operated beyond the METOC's range. For the first time, radar silence favored the hunter. At 2,000 feet, Tuckett whispers. Still there. Sir. Range 1.8. The bombardier crouches at the nose blister, hand on the flare release. But there is a problem. The Wellington cannot see what it's hunting. Below, the Atlantic is pitch black. Moonlight offers nothing. Even with radar, the moment of attack always failed in the last seconds. Crews drop deptages blind, praying for luck. That problem, however, has an answer. In the rear fuselage, wired to the power bus and angled beneath the right wing, sits the object under the tarpaulin, the Leigh Light a 24-inch carbon arc searchlight designed to unleash 22 million candle power of blinding light in the final seconds of attack. Developed by Squadron Leader Humphrey de Leigh, it had been tested in secrecy for months. Tonight, this crew is among the first to carry it into combat. The air is thin with anticipation. Hodgson checks the altimeter 500 feet. The sea rises into ghostly ridges. Prepare the light. He orders. Below, U-502's lookouts sweep the horizon. The wireless operator is sending weather codes to France. The rest smoke in silence. The diesel rhythm feels almost peaceful. One of them thinks of home, of Lübeck's harbour at dusk. Then the night explodes. A cone of white daylight crashes down from the heavens, searing the black waves. It finds the U-boat instantly, painting her conning tower in brutal clarity. The captain's pale face, the spray from the bow, the open hatch. The crew freezes. For one heartbeat, no one moves. Then chaos. Alarm, dive, dive. The klaxon howls. Men scramble. Boots slip on the deck. The sea boils as ballast tanks flood. But the Wellington is already diving too. Engines screaming. Depth charges tumble into the water. One after another, 4 glowing cylinders dropping straight into the illuminated vortex. The shock wave lifts the U-boat sideways. Light and flame mix with foam. The diesel engines silence. From above, the light fades, leaving only blackness again. Hodgson circles once. No surface contact. Tucket confirms. Oil slick forming. For the first time, an RAF Coastal Command aircraft is killed in the dark not by luck, but by design. Hodgson scribbles a note in his logbook. Leigh Light and ASV Mk.III success. Enemy destroyed. Crew shaken but safe. Far below, the oil floats like a dark halo on the sea. The war beneath the waves will never be the same. But as dawn rises, the men of U-boat command will not yet know what weapon has found them. Only that something unseen and terribly bright now hunts at night. They would not yet know what had found them. Only that something unseen and terribly bright now hunted at night. The sea fell silent again. But from that night on, U-boat crews understood that the enemy had learned to see through darkness, and the hunt would never be the same. April 1943 Lorient. On the French Atlantic coast, morning mist hangs over the pens of the 10th U-boat flotilla. The air smells of diesel, salt, and concrete. Mechanics work in near silence, their hammers echoing through the massive submarine shelters built from thousands of tons of reinforced steel. Inside the command office, Admiral Karl Dönitz studies a fresh report from the front lines. His jaw tightens. 3 U-boats, U-502, U-333, and U-665, all lost within a single week. No survivors. The common detail: each had been attacked at night. On the surface, without warning, the survivors from another damaged boat swore they had seen a sudden white sun before the explosions. Dönitz lowers the paper. Eine weiße Sonne himormos. Nonsense. Impossible. Yet the evidence grows. Crews whisper that the British have some kind of Wunderlicht, a miracle light. Engineers are ordered to investigate. For 4 years, darkness had been the submariner's greatest ally. The Atlantic was vast, and by day they could hide beneath it. By night, they could prowl unseen. Diesel engines sculpting air, charging batteries, striking convoys under the cover of black water. But now that cloak of night seems torn. In Kiel, technical officers of the Kriegsmarine meet with specialists from Telefunken and Gima, the firms behind the U-boat's defensive electronics. They know that every German submarine carries a radar warning receiver called METOX, tuned to detect the British ASV radar's 5-meter wavelength. When the signal spikes, the crew dive simple and effective. But lately, U-boats are being surprised with no alarm at all. A physicist points to the problem on a chalkboard. If the British have changed frequency perhaps to 10 centimetres, Metox cannot hear it. The warning sets are deaf. Silence fills the room. The men realise what that means. The enemy's eyes have evolved. Meanwhile, on the other side of the channel, RAF Coastal Command keeps its own secret tighter than ever. The ASV Mk.III radar, built from the same magnetron technology as Britain's night fighter systems, can now spot a periscope head at 4 miles. Combined with the Leigh Light, it turns every patrol into a trap. At Thorney Island, squadron leader Humphrey Leigh himself watches a crew preparing a Wellington for another test. He had first proposed mounting a giant searchlight under an aircraft's belly in 1941 and had been dismissed as eccentric. It will blind the pilot, the Air Ministry had said, but he had persisted, wiring and testing prototypes on borrowed aircraft until Coastal Command finally listened. Now, his creation is rewriting the war. From the ground, the system looks absurd. A heavy lamp, a carbon arc reflector, a mirror housing bolted into an open blister under the wing. But in the sky, used at just the right second, when radar brings the aircraft within a mile of its prey, it is perfect. The U-boat has no time to dive. The floodlight fixes it in the beam for 10 seconds. Long enough for the attack run. Flight crews call those moments the 10-second eternity. For the men below, it feels like divine judgment. Back in Lorient, young Lieutenant Otto Frischmann smokes a cigarette by the concrete wall of the pen, waiting for orders. His comrades tease that they'll never see another night sky again. The English light the ocean like a football field. Someone says, they laugh, but uneasily. Each new patrol leaves with a mix of defiance and dread. In May, the U-boat arm launches countermeasures. Technicians test new radar detectors. First, Naxos, then Tunis, capable of sensing the British microwave bands, but production is slow, and the frontline boats remain exposed. Dönitz, increasingly desperate, orders changes in tactics: dive before dusk, surface only at dawn, recharge batteries in bad weather, when patrol aircraft can't fly. But the RAF has learned 2 fitting Sunderland flying boats with the same radar light system, capable of patrolling far deeper into the Atlantic Gap. Night after night, the pattern repeats. A blip on radar, silence. Then, sudden blinding light and the hammer of depth charges. Through the spring of 1943, U-boat losses in the North Atlantic became catastrophic. Black May alone saw over 40 boats sunk, and the balance at sea began to tilt. Crews began to call it Die Schwarze Zeit, the black time. In one intercepted diary, a German radio operator writes, "We surfaced at midnight. No warning from Metox. Then came the light. I saw the faces of my comrades as if it were day. The sea was white fire. I thought it was the end of the world." By early summer, Allied convoys crossing the Atlantic lose only a fraction of what they once did. The hunter and hunted have traded places. Coastal Command's motto, once half mocked, now rings true. If we can see them, we can kill them. And yet, within those concrete pens at Lorient, Dönitz still believes he can adapt. The wolf pack will return. He tells his staff, "We will fight in the deep again." His engineers promise new radar detectors, better snorkels, faster divers. But outside, in the harbours of Brittany, widows gather silently at the water's edge. The light that was meant to save convoys has also illuminated something else, the human cost of the invisible war beneath the waves. June 1, 943300 miles west of Ireland. A gale lashes the Atlantic, sending walls of water slamming against the fuselage of a short Sunderland Mk.III of No. 228 Squadron. The flying boat groans with every gust. Inside, Pilot Officer Raymond Hall grips the yoke, his eyes flicking between the altimeter and the black, nothing beyond the cockpit. Spray seeps through every seam. Radar contact. Sear. Bearing 085. Range 3 miles. Calls the operator. Hall's jaw tightens. Hold her steady. Let's see if we can make out his wake. Below. The radar's pale green screen pulses one bright echo moving against the waves. Somewhere down there, a submarine is running for its life. For months, RAF Coastal Command had refined the art of the night hunt. The Leigh Light now shone from both Wellingtons and Sunderlands, and a new generation of liberators stretched the patrol range deep into the mid-Atlantic. The once lethal Black Pit was shrinking every week. But it came at a cost. The missions were exhausting, the conditions brutal. Crews averaged 10-hour flights over freezing seas, with only caffeine, cigarettes, and the hum of the radar for company. Hall's aircraft, call sign P. Peter, had already been in the air for 7 hours. Their convoy HX 239 steamed safely below, unaware that this lonely aircraft was its unseen shield. The radar echo steadies. Hall orders a descent. The Sunderland drops to 500 feet. Skimming through fog and spray, the operator counts down distances. 2 miles, 1.5. Hall nods to the gunner. Light ready, ready. The next moment, the ocean explodes in white. The Leigh Light ignites, slicing through mist and rain like a divine sword. It catches the dark spine of U-564. A Type Vic surfacing to recharge. The conning tower gleams in the sudden glare. Crewmen on deck throw up their arms. Blinded. Attack 4 depth. Charges roll from the bomb bay, splashing in a precise diamond pattern. The blast lifts water higher than the Sunderland's wings. Hall banks hard to avoid the plume. In the glare, the U-boat tilts sharply. The stern rises, then vanishes beneath boiling foam. A patch of oil and debris surfaces moments later. The crew inside the Sunderland cheer softly, not from triumph, but from release. Another threat gone. Another convoy that will reach Liverpool. They log the kill at 0341 hours. U-564, lost with all hands. Far away. In Berlin, the tone of naval meetings has turned grim. Dönitz, now Grand Admiral, no longer speaks with defiance. Instead, his staff analyze maps crowded with red ink, each marking a boat that failed to return. He knows the numbers. Between May and July, U-boat losses have reached unsustainable levels. In May alone, 40 et un submarine destroyed. In June, 35 more. The wolf packs that once hunted convoys now crawl into ports like wounded animals. Gentlemen, Dönitz says to his officers, we are fighting blind against a weapon. We cannot see. The new radar detectors Naxos and Tunis trickle in, but too late to save the spring patrols. Engineers propose installing snorkel breathing tubes to keep U-boats submerged longer, avoiding radar sweeps. But every solution takes time, and time is what Germany no longer has. Reports arrive from the field, captains refusing orders to surface at night. Morale collapsing. In Lorient, wives receive telegrams daily vermisst of sea missing at sea. Meanwhile, the British and Americans share data, accelerating radar development. In London, Air Chief Marshal Sir John Slessor writes in his diary, the Leigh Light, once dismissed as folly, has transformed the Atlantic. For the first time, we own the night. Back in the North Atlantic, the human cost continues. A rescue trawler, HMS Northern Gem, pulls survivors from the wreckage of a torpedoed merchant ship. The sea glows faintly from phosphorescent oil. Among the rescued are men who had been adrift for 2 days. They speak of hearing explosions in the distance, a thunder in the dark, the sound of Coastal Command at work. One of the survivors, a young stoker from Glasgow, asks the ship's doctor, Do they ever see the faces of the ones they sink? The doctor shakes his head. No, it's too dark for that. The boy nods. Then maybe it's better that way. The Battle of the Atlantic was never a victory of heroics alone. It was a war of mathematics, magnetrons, and endurance. Behind every successful patrol lay the invisible labor of radar operators, engineers, and factory workers soldering circuits under blackout lamp. The light that fell upon the sea in 1943 was not merely a weapon. It was the visible edge of an unseen revolution. By autumn, Allied escorts carriers, long-range liberators, and new radar networks had closed the final gaps. Convoy losses dropped to their lowest since 1940. For the first time in 4 years, Britain's supply lines breathed again. Yet in every mess hall and crew room, the same question hung in the air. What would come next, if the night was no longer safe for the hunter? Perhaps the ocean itself would soon belong to no one. Hall's crew returned to base that evening. The Sunderland lands heavily on the estuary, salt spray trailing off its wings. Mechanics wade out to meet them. No one celebrates, only tired nods. A silent acknowledgement that they've lived another night. As Hall steps down from the hatch, the horizon begins to glow pink with dawn. The light spreads across the airfield, soft and ordinary. Nothing like the cold brilliance of the one they carry beneath their wing. It is a strange irony. He thinks that the same light which saves lives can also take them. After the summer of 1943, the Atlantic changed forever. For the first time since the war began, the ocean's rhythm no longer belonged to the hunters. It was the convoys, the endless chains of freighters, tankers, and troop ships that now dictated the tempo. And above them, in constant motion, flew the aircraft of RAF Coastal Command and the U.S. Navis patrolling, their radar dishes spinning, their searchlights ready. The Battle of the Atlantic was far from over, but its tide had unmistakably turned. September 1943, La Ferne, Northern Ireland. On the still water of the lake, a line of consolidated liberators waited for dawn. Ground crews moved between them, tightening bolts and checking radar sets that now came standard on every long-range patrol bomber. In the operations hut, Air Vice Marshal J. M. Robb briefed a group of young pilots. Gentlemen, the U-boats are leaving the North Atlantic lanes. They're shifting south, toward the Bay of Biscay. Your task is to make sure they never feel safe again. The crews nodded. They knew the pattern well. Each time the enemy adapted, the airmen followed. Coastal Command had learned to think like the submariners, anticipate their dives, their routes, even the weather windows they favoured. The ocean had become a chessboard, one lit not by daylight, but by radar pulses and the faint glow of oscilloscope tubes. Across the Channel, in Paris, the mood inside the German Naval Liaison Office was desolate. Dennett's staff now received daily reports marked Verlust loss of 238 operational U-boats in service that spring. More than a third were gone by year's end. The crews who returned told the same story: radar, lights, and death out of nowhere. To survive, Germany pushed ahead with desperate innovations. The schnorkel-breathing mast allowed submarines to recharge batteries while submerged, reducing the need to surface. The Type 21 electroboot, a revolutionary all-electric design, was drawn on blueprints, but its completion would come too late to alter the course of the war. By early 1944, the U-boat fleet had effectively lost the initiative. The Allies, using HF divided by DF high-frequency direction finding, ultra-code breaking, and the expanding Leigh Light radar patrols, now tracked submarine transmissions within minutes. What had once been a silent war had become a contest of signals. At Derby, in a brick workshop filled with cigarette smoke, a group of engineers from TRE Telecommunications Research Establishment huddled around a magnetron assembly. They were civilians, not soldiers. Yet their inventions had reshaped the entire Atlantic campaign. One of them, Dr. Bernard Level, would later recall, "The men in the air carried the light, but we built the eyes that found the enemy." In the same year, factory workers, many of them women, produced the 1000th ASV Mk.III radar unit. Each was a small miracle of engineering. Hand ensemble. Wired with precision. Every set shipped to an aircraft meant more convoys reaching Britain's port suite from Canada, fuel from the Caribbean, troops from America. The war machine fed on the rhythm of those deliveries, and it was the radar that kept that rhythm alive. Meanwhile, for the men who had lived the earlier terror of the Atlantic, the change felt almost unreal. Merchant sailors who had once crossed the ocean expecting death now saw days pass without a single sighting of a periscope. In Liverpool's docks, the cranes swung without pause, unloading cargoes on an open ski. In December 1943, Winston Churchill sent a personal message to the Admiralty: "The Battle of the Atlantic has been won. But let us never forget what it cost to win it." By war's end, over 700 merchant ships and nearly 30,000 sailors had been lost, and on the other side, 783 U-boats and more than 28,000 German submariners. It remained, by every measure, the longest and most unforgiving campaign of World War II. The technology that had once been secret, the Leigh Light, the ASV Mk.II, the magnetron, would outlive the war itself. They became the foundation of a new era: civil aviation radar, meteorology, and, eventually, the earliest experiments in microwave communication. In the post-war years, survivors met sometimes by accident. A British radar officer and a former U-boat engineer found themselves seated beside each other at a conference in Hamburg in 1951. They spoke quietly. Comparing notes, the German man smiled faintly. "So it was light, after all," he said. The Briton nodded. Light and patience. On a museum wall today, at the RAF Museum Cosford, hangs one of the original Leigh Light lamps. Its mirror is dulled, its carbon arc long gone, but the inscription beneath it is simple. This light saved convoys and changed the night. Standing before it, visitors often imagine what it must have looked like, that sudden cone of brilliance cutting through fog. Finding a submarine in seconds, yet few realize how much of that light's power came not from electricity, but from the resolve of those who refused to surrender the sea. As the war receded into memory, veterans like Raymond Hall rarely spoke about the attacks. "We did what we had to do," he once told a journalist, "but every time I see a calm sea, I still remember that white flash. It was like turning on the sun for 10 seconds, and then the world went dark again." The light had done its duty. The Atlantic, at last, could breathe.